FDA and the public believe in a transparent process for information gathering and decision making. To ensure such transparency at the open public hearing session of the advisory committee meeting, FDA believes that it is important to understand the context of an individual's presentation. For this reason, FDA encourages you, the open public hearing speaker, at the beginning of your written or oral statement to advise the committee of any financial relationships that you may have with the sponsor, its product, and if known, its direct competitors. For example, this financial information may include the sponsor's payment of your travel, lodging, or other expenses in connection with your participation in the meeting. Likewise, FDA encourages you at the beginning of your statement to advise the committee if you do not have any such financial relationships. If you choose not to address the issue of financial relationships at the beginning of your statement, it will not preclude you from speaking. The FDA and this committee places great importance in the open public hearing process. The insights and comments provided can help the agency and this committee in their consideration of the issues before them. That said, in many instances and for many topics, there will be a variety of opinions. One of our goals for today is for this open public hearing to be conducted in a fair and open way, where every participant is listened to carefully and treated with dignity, courtesy, and respect. Therefore, please speak only when recognized by the chairperson. Thank you for your cooperation. Speaker number 1, your audio is connected now. Will speaker number 1 please begin and introduce yourself? Please state your name and your organization you're representing for the record.
My name is Andrea Eidelman, and I am the CEO of Debbie's Dream Foundation Curing Stomach Cancer. We are the largest patient advocacy group for stomach cancer, and I have not received compensation from the sponsor for my presentation here today. I am here because this issue goes to the heart of the mission of the Debbie's Dream Foundation. Our founder, Debbie Zellman, founded the organization in 2009 after 1 year of being diagnosed with stage 4 incurable stomach cancer. Debbie was just 40 years old, a mother of 3, a practicing attorney, and the wife and daughter of a prominent physician. Debbie found through her own personal journey that there had not been a new treatment in gastric cancer in over 30 years. She founded the organization to change this landscape. Her goal was to fund research and provide more treatment options for stomach cancer patients. We are now in 2021, not 2009, and as a patient advocate of one of the greatest unmet needs of our stomach cancer community is around the fact that patients still run out of treatment options pretty quickly. During my time here, I have seen patients struggle through the same journey as Debbie and have personally interacted with patients that are taking Keytruda. For many, this medication has made an extraordinary impact. I am here today to support to keep the accelerated approval for Keytruda. The reasons why is that patients benefited in the third line that have not had IO in the past. It is also shown to be good for third-line patients that can't tolerate additional chemotherapy like older patients, which is a large part of our patient population. Keytruda satisfies one of those unmet needs arising from the lack of treatment options, and it has proven to benefit many patients. Thank you for your time. Do you have any questions for me?
I have not received compensation from the sponsor for my presentation today. My name is Terry G. Good morning, and thank you for having me. In February of 2018, 2 months before my 80th birthday, I was diagnosed with stage 4 esophageal cancer that had already spread to the liver. The tumor blockage was in the GI junction, part of my esophagus, and I was placed on a feeding tube due to my inability to swallow. 40 days post-diagnosis, I finally had my first FOLFOX chemotherapy treatment. Amazingly, after the 4th treatment, my tumor shrunk to half its size. I continued with 10 more rounds of FOLFOX and then followed that with 22 daily treatments of radiation. Almost a year into my whole journey in March of 2019, I began immunotherapy. I began receiving treatments of Herceptin every 3 weeks. Unfortunately, though, about 4 months later, just after 6 treatments, the CT showed signs of tumor reappearing. The suggestion was to do more radiation and pair it up with a different immunotherapy other than Herceptin. That's when I was introduced to Keytruda. Having gone through a year of heavy-duty treatment at 80 years old, I mentioned to my oncologist and radiologist that I just couldn't physically handle both radiation and Keytruda, and I opted for just Keytruda. It only took a few treatments for the CT to show that I was undetectable, and to this day I still am. I just turned 82 last week, and I just finished my 30th treatment of Keytruda. I tolerate it very well and only have had some mild side effects along the way. During the first year, I experienced leg sores, but mitigated them with a topical steroid. And more recently, I have had an itchy rash on my entire body, excluding my legs. Again, though, I have been able to manage it with a steroid. I am so pleased with the results I have gotten these past 2 years with Keytruda. I may not be alive today if not for this immunotherapy drug. Our family has been familiar to this disease for the past 27 years, with one of my 2 daughters having Lynch syndrome. She has battled colon cancer twice already, the first being stage 3 at age 28, stage 1 at 39, and as well as thyroid cancer at 24. Finally, I would be remiss if I didn't mention Mario, my late husband. Unfortunately and ironically, he passed 11 years ago of stage 4 stomach cancer that had already spread to his liver. The time frame between his diagnosis and his passing was 8 weeks. Mario opted to forego any treatment, but was strong until the very end and with not one complaint. In closing, I want to say thank you for having been blessed to have both the immunotherapy drugs and the doctors available to my family and myself. Being on Keytruda has allowed me to have a quality of life that I am familiar with and has extended my life as well. Our family and I are so grateful. Thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Speaker number 3, can you please begin and introduce yourself? Please state your name and any organization you're representing for the record.
Yes, hi, I'm Dr. Diana Zuckerman, President of the National Center for Health Research. Next slide, please. Our center is a nonprofit think tank that scrutinizes the safety and effectiveness of medical products, and we don't accept funding from companies that make those products. Today, I'm speaking from my perspective as a scientist who left Harvard more than 30 years ago to come to Washington, D.C. to work in the House of Representatives. I worked as a congressional investigator for the subcommittee that conducts oversight over HHS, and that's when I first learned about the laws and regulations governing the FDA. I was responsible for several oversight hearings that attracted enormous media attention because we found that patients had been harmed when the FDA was not following the law pertaining to FDA approval. Again, that was a long time ago. Next slide, please. The law is very clear. Drugs and biologics must be proven safe and effective, and that's defined as having benefits that outweigh the risks for most patients. FDA's memoranda provided to this committee for this meeting and for each of these indications over the last 3 days have made it clear that the data do not support that. This advisory committee has looked at the data, seen reasons for optimism when looking at non-significant trends, and recommended that the FDA keep drugs on the market that don't meet the standard specified by law. That's your right to do that since you're advising the FDA based on your perspectives, your experiences, and your interpretations of the data. So I want to thank the FDA scientists who carefully analyzed the data and presented their findings. You did a great job. I'm here to urge the FDA to follow in your footsteps and follow the law and rescind approval for these indications until the companies complete randomized clinical trials that prove that the benefits outweigh the risks. I especially want to thank Dr. Pazder for explaining how the FDA's expanded access program can fill in the gaps for patients who need access. That's a program we strongly support at our center. The companies agreed to complete confirmatory trials as part of the accelerated approval of their drugs, and I strongly urge the FDA to hold them to it. All of these companies are leaders in their field and absolutely capable of conducting the research needed to prove whether or not their drugs have benefits that outweigh the risks for the exact specific indications they were previously approved for. The companies also have the ability to make expanded access quick and easy. Let's face it, if they don't have the expertise and resources to do the studies and to help with expanded access, who does? If the data don't confirm the initial accelerated approval, the companies should work with the FDA to design trials to narrow the indication to figure out which are the patients most likely to be helped and which are the ones most likely to be harmed. That's it. I don't want to use any more of my slides, and I just want to thank you for the opportunity to speak today.
Speaker 4, can you please begin and introduce yourself? Please state your name and any organization you're representing for the record.
My name is Samuel Klempner. I'm a GI medical oncologist at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston, Massachusetts, and I'm speaking on behalf of myself. I have not received any compensation for this presentation, although in the spirit of full transparency, as someone focused in gastric esophageal, I have received advisory compensation from Merck, BMS, and other industry partners in the field of gastric cancer. I'm really speaking on behalf of myself, but more on behalf of the gastroesophageal patients who are here in my clinic today. In fact, right now I'm between two advanced gastric cancer patients, one of whom is going to be waiting an extra few minutes. But for the last 8 years, I've exclusively focused in caring for gastric and esophageal cancer patients and been lucky enough to see our toolkit expand several times, thanks in part to this committee and the larger FDA. Having been through cancer with my mother when I was in my 20s and a medical student, I can speak to how reassuring it is as a son and as a caregiver to hear an oncologist talk about having multiple available agents to offer a patient during their journey. I do know that the gastric and esophageal treatment landscape is changing and will continue to change over the years, but the reality for this disease is that unfortunately the timelines for our patients are not measured in years. In fact, if you took a cross-sectional snapshot of the U.S. gastric and esophageal population right now, several thousand patients on current first-line therapy and second-line therapy, a large portion of them will have passed away over the next 6 to 9 months. I'd like to recognize ODAC and the FDA more broadly for their role in understanding the aggressive disease that is gastric esophageal adenocarcinomas and helping to increase the number of available agents. But I would also really like to point out the urgent existing need to maintain our current toolkit. You know, as practitioners, we deal on the front line with implementing new approvals and recognize that broad implementation takes time. Looking at my own clinic, since the recent frontline pembrolizumab and nivolumab approvals, nearly all my patients currently receiving 5-FU and platinum are not receiving a current PD-1 based on the approval timelines. I know this not to just be true for my clinic, but is particularly true of smaller community practices. I'm lucky enough to practice in a large academic center where we have maximal resources and change can happen more quickly. But 75 to 80% of our patients are actually cared for in the community, where we anticipate a further lag before frontline chemo plus PD-1 is more widely adopted. All of these IO-naive patients will continue to progress through first and second line therapies, and we will remain a pool of candidates for current third line pembrolizumab approval. I do have concerns about jeopardizing the toolkit and available options for these patients that continue to be IO naive in the first and second line setting currently. Anyone who's been touched by this disease really can understand the morbidity and the cumulative burden of therapy. It's really a relentless disease, and striking a balance of quality and quantity is increasingly important as we go through lines of therapy. And the current third-line pembrolizumab approval for PD-L1 positive patients has hit this balance for many of my own patients. As I think you can see from practice patterns and market research clearly bears out, when a PD-L1 positive patient coming into third line or later is given a choice between pembrolizumab or chemotherapy, the data really has spoken for itself in terms of the prescribing patterns. In the last few moments, I really just want to speak to the difficulty of conducting validation studies in this third line or later population. The previous speaker made some excellent points, and I fully recognize that no trial is perfect, but when Keynote-059 was designed and initiated, we did have a significantly lesser understanding of what factors may impact PD-1 responsiveness. What we did know was that there was a huge unmet need and a patient population desperate for more options. In the years since, we've learned a lot, but third-line activity of pembrolizumab remains in PD-L1 positive patients. I imagine this is quite clear to the committee. The evolving landscape and anticipated increase in first-line chemo and PD-1 will make conducting another third-line PD-1 trial essentially impossible. As a clinical investigator and strong believer in trials, I completely understand the rationale and desire for additional data in the third-line space, but I also recognize that this will just not be possible. So we're left with existing data and existing patient population who we just want to maintain our maximal therapeutic options. So on behalf of myself and my own patients and many others, I'm simply advocating for your help in maintaining the maximal available options for our patients as the landscape continues to evolve. Thank you for the time.
Will speaker 5 please begin and introduce yourself? Please state your name and any organization you're representing for the record.
Good morning. My name is David Beal. I am a patient of Dr. Enzinger. I've received no financial, compensation. I met Dr. Enzinger on July 1st, 2014. I was given approximately 6 months to live. I'm sorry, I'm very emotional. I prepared for this and it's not working. I am a patient who lives in rural New Hampshire, and my local doctor, when I was diagnosed on May 1st of 2014, told my wife and I that he would provide palliative care for us. And I'm a CPA, and I had no idea what palliative care was. Thanks to Dr. Enzinger, he guided my country physician for 18 months until this trial came up. During my first visit with Dr. Enzinger, he spent an hour with me. And his final words to me were, you have one job. Your job's to stay alive until I can find a treatment for you. And Keytruda saved me. I'm sorry. This isn't very productive. I'd just like to point out to the panel as a whole that all these trials include only one thing: people like me. We're numbers on a sheet of paper when you analyze the trials and their effectiveness. But as the previous doctor just said, who I've never met, and I don't remember his name, from Mass General, it doesn't make any sense to me as a layperson and as a patient for you to take any possible treatment for a patient off the table when it works even for 10 or 15% of the people in the trial. I expected to know Dr. Enzinger for one Christmas. We have happily met every 3 weeks for 7 Christmases. And my time's up. If anybody wants to ask me a question, I'd be happy to, but I'm so proud to know Dr. Enzinger and all the people at Dana-Farber. My grandchildren, thank you. And my daughters, thank you. And it doesn't make any sense to me to take a treatment off the table that works for some of us. Does it work for everybody? No. But you know what? There's nothing that works for anybody. Because to me, and all the different treatments I've had and all the different nurses I've talked to, all cancers seem to treat everybody just a little differently. And Keytruda works for some of us. And it makes no sense to take it off the table. I'm still on it. I was in full remission after 18 months in the trial. I went back to a normal. I'm sorry.
No, on the contrary, we do have to move on, but I just wanted to thank you so much for reminding us, those of us who are oncologists, what we do every single day and why we do it. So it was a beautiful statement. So
I'm sorry.
on the contrary, I want to thank you and all the speakers today. It was very helpful for us. The open public hearing portion of this meeting has now concluded, and we will no longer take comments from the audience. We will now take the remaining clarifying questions for all the presenters thus far. Please use the raise hand icon to indicate that you have a question, and remember to put your hand down after you have asked your question. Please remember to state your name for the record before you speak and direct your question to a specific presenter if you can. If you wish for a specific slide to be displayed, please let us know the slide number if possible. As a gentle reminder, it would be helpful to acknowledge the end of your question with a thank you and end of your follow-up question with "this is all for my question," so we can move on to the next panel. I would say, as you probably have noticed, we are a little bit behind, so I would ask the committee members to keep the questions brief if possible. And I'm going to start with Dr. Halliday.
Hi, Susan Halliday. I think someone else answered my concern, but I would like briefly to ask the sponsor if they have any data on potential confounding treatment post-progression from their trial that they could share with us. Thank you.
Sure. Dr. Bahagia, would you like to review the subsequent therapies from our studies? You could do 61 and 62 and 59.
Pooja Bhagia, Merck Clinical. Can I please see the slide that has the 61 subsequent therapies showing both the arms, the pembrolizumab arm and the paclitaxel arm? And while that slide is being pulled up, I just want to point out that in Keynote 61, the immunotherapy was about 10% in the paclitaxel arm as subsequent therapy, and there were no patients, slide up please, and there were no patients that received immunotherapy in the pembrolizumab arm. Moreover, as you will see on the slide when it's shared, that
the total number of any subsequent therapy was also higher in the paclitaxel arm, as is now projected on the screen, which was approximately 60% of the patients, and this was lower in the pembrolizumab arm at 45.9%. Back to you, Dr. Ibrahim.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Mitchell has a question.
It's Mr. Mitchell. I wish it was Dr. Mitchell.
Okay, Mr. Mitchell. Sorry about that.
Question for the folks from Merck. In the slide that showed the 4 trials that could possibly serve as confirmatory trials, the year of completion was 2024. But one of the representatives from Merck said there might be data as soon as 1 to 4 years. Is it possible that there would be confirmatory data from those trials as soon as a year from now?
Yes, so if you can pull up the slide from the core deck for the 4 studies. And yes, so all the studies have interim analysis built in, and these are all event-driven. So depending on how quickly the study enrolls, how quickly these events accumulate, that will dictate and trigger the first analysis. So yes, it can be much sooner. For example, sorry, I'm not seeing the slide yet, but for example, we mentioned Keynote 811, slide up, which did have an interim analysis that is under review currently with the agency, so a much earlier time point, but still waiting for the final analysis. So yes, to answer your question, we can have data much sooner than the 1 to 3 years that we're quoting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have a question from Dr. Pamela Kuntz.
Hi, it's Dr. Kuntz from Yale Cancer Center. I have a question for Dr. Lemery. And there were a number of comments made throughout that there may be, if this approval were removed, that there will be a lag in patients not being able to access third-line therapy. Dr. Lemery mentioned a delay in removal for several months. Can you please speak to that and if there's precedent for that?
With my understanding is with one of drugs that was removed, it did take some time to actually take it off the market, and I'm not sure if that was due simply to this or other operational factors. Maybe I'll ask Dr. Beaver or Dr. Pazdur if they have experience, because they've dealt with more withdrawals than I have. Before I hand the phone or the mic over to them, though, I just want to comment on one thing with the prior, just to clarify based on the prior answer from Merck regarding the interim analysis. Some of those interim analyses aren't necessarily what we would expect for a full regular approval. They may be based on surrogate endpoints that could support an accelerated approval and not a full approval. So, these studies depends on the action would depend on what the interim analysis was and what the results are. Whether an earlier analysis would support a regular approval. Dr. Pazdur, do you have any anything to add about the Dr. Kuntz's question about delaying the timing of withdrawing the accelerated approval from the market?
Stephen?
Yeah.
Can you guys hear me? Yeah, this is Lola Fashoyinajay. I can maybe, I can maybe chime in before Dr. Pazdur has an opportunity. I was just going to mention that, we do have experience with providing access to therapies that have been previously withdrawn from the market. And one recent example is the drug olaratumab, which was withdrawn from market. It was indicated for the treatment of soft tissue sarcoma. And in that case, it took I would say approximately a year or even longer than that from the time when we initiated discussions about withdrawal to when it was ultimately withdrawn. And we worked with the company very closely to ensure that patients had access to treatment, including patients who had recently initiated treatment with the drug. So there is a mechanism for that, and so I think that's something that can be easily addressed.
Yeah, I'd like to just chime in. Yes, we would use our discretion on that point and allow maximum availability of the drug while we're negotiating with the company the negotiation of the withdrawal of the indication. So there is flexibility here. The other point I'd like to make sure that the members of the committee realize, there were 4 other applications or indications by the companies that make PD-1 drugs that were withdrawn. And we've had discussions with all of them on this same topic of the withdrawal and ensuring the continued availability of the drug. So we're doing this with the 4 other indications where they have been withdrawn, and these companies are stepping up to the plate to ensure that the patients receive these drugs in a timely fashion, even though the marketing indications may be removed. So there is discussions on these 4 drugs or these 4 indications that have been previously removed.
I'd like to clarify my response to Dr. Kunz. So, Dr. Kunz? Or Mr. Mitchell, sorry. So Keynote 859, actually, its first interim will read out for overall survival, and it could be as early next year. So that would, according to Dr. Lemery's response, that would be for a full approval. So each study is variable, and it depends, but we're confident, and based on the results you're aware of with Checkmate 649, this is a similar study, same size, similar population. So we're anxiously awaiting that study to read out.
Thank you. The committee will now turn its attention to address the task at hand, the careful consideration of the data before the committee as well as the public comments. We will proceed with the question to the committee and panel discussion. I would like to remind public